Our next speaker is Leo Farias. Leo is another GDE founder, a GDE, sorry, for Flutter and Dart. He's a founder, CEO of Concepta Technologies. Leo is a designer, turned coder, turned entrepreneur, and also CEO. He is very enthusiastic about creating solutions for using technology and software. Because of his background in design, Leo is particularly interested in human-computer interaction and exploring different unified UI solutions. Leo Faria today is going to talk us about building design system for a unified UI world. So let's welcome Leo Farias to the stage. Hi Leo, how are you? How you doing?
Hello, I'm good. How are you guys?
Pretty fine, thanks. So the stage is yours. You already have your slide share.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to just, I guess, thank for be able to speak at this event. I've been following the Flutter Global Summit for a long time, and all the organizers put together is amazing. It's a beautiful event, and it's really nice to see the level of professionalism and dedication being put to really raise the bar for Flutter developers around the world. So just congratulations to the whole team organizing. So today I'm going to be talking about design systems for a unified UI world. And I think Oscar already did a brief introduction, but I'm Leo Farias. I'm a Flutter and Darts GDE. And I'm also CEO of Concepta. Concepta is a software development agency located in the United States in Orlando, Florida. And we do a lot of enterprise development and mobile development. And we are using Flutter a lot more internally, and we continue to use, across the board for multiple devices. And this is something that is something I'm passionate about and interested on, which is, being able to use a tool that is so flexible that can be leveraged in so many ways, and also see how we can improve our own products, improve our own technology. So I just want to first, which I think it kind of encompasses the whole topic, which is one of my favorite quotes from the Airbnb VP of Design, which says, "You can't innovate on products without first innovating the way you build them." And this quote is interesting because what we're going to be talking about as far as design systems, it's about innovating how you build product on probably the most direct basis, right? So we're going to be going over, but that's something I would like to keep in mind, which is, you got to have a solid foundation. You got to have the solid base in order to be able to build really great products. Okay. So a lot of you guys probably are aware of design systems. I'm going to go through the definition of design systems. I'm going to discuss a little bit differently and open-minded if people are not aware on how they should be thinking about design systems for Flutter, so they're going to be able to get a good overview. Okay, so design system is a set of standards to manage design at scale by reducing the redundancy while creating shared language and visual consistency across different pages and channels, right? So essentially you're going to be able to create a design system is supposed to be a UI language that is consistent throughout all your products, is consistent throughout from expectation of when people your audience is interacting with, is consistent throughout. So where does the design system fit within the context of brand and all the way through the audience, right? So the design system lives right in between. So normally people think design system more like a branding exercise. Oh, I want to feel like the brand, right? Now design system is a lot more than that. Now it does incorporate branding. However, it has a common language about interactions, features, and behaviors on how the users expect when they are going from different platforms or even different products within your own design system, right? So the design system is the piece that is going to be able to connect the digital experiences to the audience. And it does that by creating and enabling consistent and efficient expressions of that brand, right? So that's the context, like you guys keep in mind when we talk about design systems. So what is a basic anatomy of a design system? Okay, so then it has many forms, right? And it has a combination of the following: is a style guide, widget library, and a pattern library. Now, you probably heard, if you're aware of design systems, things like design language. Okay, so the design language is another word for style guide. And there's a lot of people that are very familiar with atomic design. So essentially saying that you have atoms, which are these small primitives, and then you go in and you have these molecules, which are putting pieces together, and then you have the organisms. The same applies here. So we have essentially the widget library, which would be the atoms and maybe some molecules, and the patterns is starting to put all the pieces together. So it still follows the same uh, way to think about it. Essentially, is what is the definition of the language of the design? What are the basic primitives, and how should we use those primitives? Essentially, that's what the anatomy of the design system. So, what pieces Style Guide has? So, it contains specific implementation guidelines, visual references, and design principles for creating interfaces in order to design deliverables. Right? So, we can think of the style guides on the most basic level is colors. Okay, is the typography. However, a style guide also contains the sizing of elements. What should they be? What is the spacing? What are the paddings? What are the margins in between? How spaced out should the elements between? How much space? So space and negative space will change the way a design looks and is perceived. And also things like layout and grid, the icons, and secondary, some design systems, material being one of them, does provide things like elevation, shadows, radius. So essentially, is that's the common language. So we can use a design language and style guide interchangeably to be able to uh, describe those two things. So how do we get the design guide, the style guides to the application itself? So we have a concept of design tokens. And I really like this definition, which you can measure from the material website. The design tokens are small, repeated design decisions that make up the design system's style guide. So essentially, is all these decisions that are made about what color, what font, what space should be, we're going to code it in these tokens, and they're going to replace static values, and again, such as hex code, colors, with names that are easy to understand, conventional names that anyone can understand. Okay, and also enables the design system to have one source of truth. So we don't have to go through the whole design system to know, okay, what is the primary color? And each element has a color that is being called. You're able to pull this from the design tokens itself. And because you have that single source of truth, it becomes much easier to maintain the style consistency across the whole system, because with the changes on the tokens of colors and typography and spacing, you essentially can change the whole design system by just changing the tokens themselves. So I have just a brief example. So we have primary color, okay, and in the case of material 2 had on primary color, for example, and of course, depending if it's dark mode or light mode, these colors will change. So just an idea of how we should be thinking about design tokens. And then we have the widget library. Now, the most common and most popular widget library in Flutter is the material library, right? Now, the library itself is just reusable primitives. And you can think as the interactive building blocks for creating a user interface, right? So when you go to a design system, some of those widgets are things like the buttons and icon buttons, right? And forms and inputs, and the selectors, and the drop downs, and the radio buttons, right? All those pieces, the text input. It'll be the data displays, right? So if you're providing any type of notice, alerts, warning, anything like that, and how displaying data, like even a particular chip or a label or a counter, anything like that would be a data display. We have layouts, right? So these are widgets that are going to help how to lay things out on the screen, right? From a directional perspective. So an example of widgets that do layouts in Flutter, things like row, column, and so on, stack. And we also have things like feedback, which is a progress indicator, for example, is a feedback. And typography, right? Which essentially is these widgets that are just, okay, I want a header here, I want a paragraph here. So that on the most simple level is the foundation for a design system, which is the widget library, right? And that's essentially what people, when building design systems, they, after defining what the style guide is and design tokens, that's the first pieces they start going through and building. So when I have a widget library, my widgets can have variants, right? So what are variants? They're just different variations of the UI. They maintain the same design and function, but have slight modifications in style, size, color, behavior. The simplest example of this is the button, and we're also aware of how the button on Flutter is filled, outline, or sometimes a button can be disabled and looks a little bit different. A button can be an elevator, a button can be a link, depending where it displays, right? So a widget can also have many different variants of the design, and that is dictated how you use it and when to use it by the design system itself. So an example of the button here, in kind of bringing together the tokens within the widget, is when you have a button and people just see, okay, here's a button, is so and so color, but it's important to understand that there are values, right? There have been choices that have been made around the style, that the relationship between those values and just the element is not as clear. So the example here, a button is going to have a token of padding. It can have what icon am I going to have on it? What is the shadow? Again, all the stuff about the text style, the color, the size, what is the background? I can configure the border radius, the border color. So hopefully you start to see that by having those things separated in the style guide and the design tokens, normally you see all these values being part of the widget itself on the button, and you can start seeing them being defined outside, right? And that makes a huge difference on how you maintain the design system. So the last piece is the pattern library. So one way to think about it is a collection of widget groupings or layouts. So they can be very high level, they can be very specific, but they're like components, and they're meant to be reused in many ways. So I come up with a different, you know, ideas what they could be. So, for example, if I have an application or product that has a user card, and the user card is supposed to be look a different way, I can start putting that together. So the user card it's a button, it's going to be an avatar, and putting those together is like what the pattern is, right? Is an in-app notice. What is a search bar across a product? The top navigation. So that's why I'm putting together the the pattern library, or how people should start composing, or the creators of the design should start composing these elements. So, okay, so we go through the process of essentially separating all the tokens and the styles from the widgets and from the patterns. Essentially saying, okay, we need to create a layer where we define what those things are. But what is the value in doing that? Why can we not just start doing it, right? So one thing that there was the value of design system study by Sparkbox, and essentially what they did is they got an existing mature design system. Okay, I believe at the time was Carbon, and they gave these tasks to these developers to see how fast they could accomplish those tasks by doing them from scratch and essentially using the design system, right? So you can read more about on the link there. But we saw they saw an overall gain of 47% faster development, right? Now people say, okay, 47%, that's a lot. That's I think already great selling point. But one thing is important to keep in mind: it's not just 47% faster. Is 47% faster, but it's also more consistent, right? It's faster, but actually scales. It lowers technical debt, right? It's easier to onboard developers on it. So even onboarding and scaling is faster. It alleviates the strain on design resources to focus on larger, more complex problems, right? And also is more accessible. So velocity is not the only is a great reason to use a design system, but is the fact that it's faster development, but also you essentially delivering a more mature product. That is the most important piece. Okay, so where does Flutter join with design systems? And this is something that is interesting because if you've been following Flutter for a long time, I think there's a lot of different people that have opinions about Flutter and mobile and going to what platform. One thing that was interesting for me after Flutter announced, essentially Mac and Windows and Linux, and they start playing with the web, is that Flutter is the first framework or technology stack that was made from the ground up to solve the unified UI problem. And that's a huge difference. So nowadays, when people try to do unified UI, they try to do things like web and web views, right? Or use platforms like React Native, which has much more inconsistent behavior UI rendering between platforms. And Flutter is a game changer for that because Flutter is uh, the platform that essentially saying, okay, you're going to build the design, you're going to build the user interface, and we're going to guarantee that it's going to be rendered and is going to be presented in the same way across all the platforms, right? So Flutter allows us to do seamless, consistent, and visually cohesive experience across all devices and platforms, right? So we know that Flutter is multi-platform. Another benefit of Flutter has a unified development workflow. So it's great to develop iOS and Android, but as a developer, what's even better is for me to be on the same environment and have the same people be able to work on apps for multiple platforms. So the whole workflow is very unified. The testing is unified. The automated, the integration testing is unified, right? The deployment can be unified, okay? And also is very performance because of the technology behind it and the fact that it's not calling native elements and rendering is actually creating those elements and rendering on the screen. It means that you have absolute control of every single pixel on the screen. And that's something that is very unique to Flutter. And the fact that you have single code base is much easier to maintain across. So essentially, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit, but talk about how normally design systems are done for Unify UI and what is the difference for Flutter. So if you go to some of the popular design systems out there, they are separated and they're siloed, right? So even if you go to Material and you go there, they have web, iOS, Android. Actually, iOS is just applied on Material 3, but normally is iOS, Android, web, and then once you have web, these design systems, they need to offer other frameworks access, right? So now you have React, sometimes you have Vue, and you have need to have vanilla JS or web component. So essentially is once you have the style guide, which is very difficult to keep it consistent, have that communication. Now you have to coordinate with a separate team on every platform to be able to replicate that style guide, which means that changes on that style guide now needs to be rolled out throughout the platform. It means that features now are dependent on have multiple dependencies, right, across multiple products. And there's a much higher level of coordination that needs to take place in order to deploy a product. So if I wanted to deploy a new feature in a new style, I now have to coordinate between 6 platforms, right, for the style guide. And that's not just a huge overhead, but it's not as efficient. It can be very difficult to onboard. There's also conventions in between the platforms that don't translate as well to the style guide. So you have inconsistency, builds technical debt. So that's how normally multi-platform design systems are built. So what does a unified design system look like, right? So essentially we have the style guide, and we're just replicating the style guide to Flutter and Dart, right? So by replicating the style guide to Flutter and Darts, now I have iOS, I have Android, I have web, Windows, Mac, Linux, and also any other even embedded devices, Samsung TV or anything like that. The style guide is going to be rendered for all of them, and that's something that is specific to Flutter, and that's why Flutter is so exciting when it comes to the unified UI. And one of the benefits of that, especially if you're running on a small team and you want to iterate fast, is because the style guide, it's a lot closer to the development side and the widgets. You can rely on lower fidelity wireframes. If you have a mature design system, you don't need to have the designers going through each step and say, okay, this is what you're going to use, this is what's going to be done. What you can do is actually say, okay, here's the wireframes we're using these elements, and I'll allow for iteration to happen much quicker. That means faster prototypes, experimentation, and overall quicker iteration. And that's huge if you're trying to iterate quicker on your products, and also you need to target multiple platforms. Okay. Now, when you do multi-platform, there's different form factors and there are different screen sizes, right? So visual arrangement of elements, there's attention to the most important information on the screen. It makes it easy to use, take action. Now, only because Flutter renders the same, it doesn't mean you want to display the same app on your monitor as you do on your phone, as you do on your TV. Once you have your design system, it's important to adjust to different screen sizes and take advantage of the hierarchy of the information being displayed, of the priority being displayed, but you have the foundation of all the style guide that is there. And it becomes more of how to organize and lay out the information, right? So let's say you want to go ahead and build unified UI design system. Pretty much this is the options that you have with Flutter. I don't think many people are using Cupertino, a foundation, if any. But essentially is you get to use material design as is, and depending what it is, a lot of developers use material design as is. And I think with Material 3, it's starting to look a lot different. But up to Material 2, there was this look of material, right? And material is so much part of Flutter that your options are adapting material. Okay. Now, good thing is that if you can adapt the material, you're getting a lot of value, you're getting a lot of widgets, you're getting a lot of maturity, you're getting a lot of things, right? The challenge is there's a platform bias on material, which is on Android. So it does become difficult to adapt the design and take advantage of the controls on different platforms like iOS, or if you're doing on Mac, or Windows and things like that. So it can become difficult to adapt material. It looks like an Android app running on the Mac or on iOS, right? And the other option is build custom design. There's some challenge on that. Obviously, there's a much significant development effort. And also, Flutter takes advantage of aggressive, they call it aggressive composability, which means that all the widgets are, like padding is a widget. Everything is very composable and very has a lot of primitives, which to build these custom designs, you have to essentially compose all the foundational widgets, because the material widgets are already done and you cannot customize it as much from the ground up, right? So it's almost like you have the engine and the paint and everything. You don't have just the engine. There's actually an issue open where they want to separate a lot of the widget inner workings for the creation of design system. But that's something to keep in mind. So when you think about multi-platform adaptability, it's important to know that it's not about just looking the same as your design system. The app needs to be expected to behave like it's on the platform. Okay, so it's about meeting expectations. If I'm on iOS, it's important that it meets the expectations of an iOS app. So that's when you get into the platform norms versus brand design. Is maintaining consistent is very important on UX. Is probably one of the most important things. However, your app needs to be consistent with the platform. Probably that's more important than being consistent between your Android app and your iOS app and your web app being consistent. It's important that some of the controls that are there are the native looking, or they meet the expectations, because that helps to reduce cognitive load of the user and how they're interacting with the whole ecosystem. And I'll go through quickly here. If you want control along the multi-platform side, some of the widgets and utilities to help build adaptive multi-platform apps on Flutter. For screen sizes, targeting platforms, and brightness, and inputs, theme extensions, and overall environmental changes. So first is the layout builder. So essentially, is if you're building a responsive app or multiple screen apps, you're gonna have to use the layout builder. It gives you access to all the constraints of the widget, so you know how big the widget can be, max size, and you can do conditionals to create. You can actually create conditional layouts based on some of those constraints, and it's very important throughout the responsive pieces. And there's a lot of packages that make that a little bit easier. Now, depending on the behavior that you want, for example, the Cupertino scroll bar, right? The scroll bar on Android on Material looks a little bit out of place. So you have to do some conditionals, and it's important that you take advantage of those to render Cupertino specific widgets and doing widget swapping, right? And there's a lot of great packages out there, like Fluent from Bruno, and we have macOS UI, and a lot of these different platforms. And more we can start having these native controls and native behaviors as part of the design system, right? So on the forms and inputs, they are behaving correctly. An example of just reacting to brightness. So if you're doing a design system, having a dark mode will be important. And one of the widgets that we actually just had to rewrite some code, and it was very helpful, is how it behaves when building a design system, a button and hover effect and so on. Is we have a widget now that puts all the shortcuts and actions and focus and mouse region all in one place. And this has been a lifesaver because it makes things much easier on how we're interacting and doing hover states, and be able to have a little bit more control of the input feedback, if you will. So that's something, if that's something they're working on, I suggest take a look at the flexible action detector. And obviously media query. So media query, you can just get all the raw values from there. So the total height, the width, the orientation of the device. You can, the media query will allow you to have full access of everything that pretty much that is going on, and you can take advantage of that to build all these platform specifics, this responsive, the difference between bigger size screens, and, so things feel like they belong. And also theme extensions. So theme extensions is a fairly new addition. So essentially it allows you to customize the material theme and incorporate your own values in order to extend, I'll say, design tokens into custom widgets, right? Because that's one thing that if your value that you need is not within material, it does become a little bit difficult on how to implement it. So theme extensions solve that problem. Now, I won't go too much in detail, and I think there was already a talk by Scott Stahl making the most of theme extensions. I suggest you guys take a look to become more familiar of what theme extensions are and how they're being used. And one thing, because I think it's almost my time now, I've been working on the Flutter for a long time, on the Flutter side for a long time, and it's very exciting to see where Flutter is going. And I don't say like, oh, Flutter is a technology, is great. It's about solving the unified UI problem. It's being able to have a consistent representation of your application and behaviors across multiple platforms. That it's an amazing place to be. Now there are some challenges with that, and one project that I've been working on with the company, and we have some adoption already, is called Mix, which essentially is functional styles for API for Flutter. So it allows to pretty much compose visual attributes separated from widget behavior, right? And allows you very quickly to be able to add conditionals for colors and dark modes and compose the styles overall. So I suggest you guys take a look, and any feedback is great. But the goal is to be essentially what a CSS is to HTML, right? Is what Mix is. So if you think about HTML without CSS, it's just inline styles, and that's a little bit what Flutter is, inline styles. So Mix allows to separate this a little bit. So just one quick example. Here's what a widget might look without Mix, with hover effect, decorations, and so on. And this is what Mix looks like. So you can see that everything is easy to read, easy to understand, right? And you can compose them and put it together. So it becomes much easier to implement the equivalent. Yeah, so I think if I rush towards the end a little bit, but I want to make sure that I stay to my limit. But yeah, I'm open to take any questions or comments, feedback.
Thanks, Leo. Yes, we are going to read the question. Please remember, guys, if you want to ask something on the platform, go to the QA session so all the moderators can pick your questions. We have one. Let's show it. So for products already deployed, what tips you got for unify and refactor the style to be coherent?
So that's an interesting question. I think it depends also on the size of the product, but there's definitely needs to go through an auditing process. So first I'll say is the style guide well defined? Do you know what those values are? Think about it like, would you have those values now, colors and fonts, and supposed to be consistent? Because if you do have that, then it becomes easier to just go through the code and the widgets itself and start organizing those. Now, if not, then I think an audit needs to take place to know, and again, I'm guilty of that, but widgets, they're similar, and if they should be using the same style. And the first step I will do is start separating that style outside of the widget, maybe using something like theme extensions or using the material theme. Have that piece there so you can be able to bring everything in one place and then start refactoring and reusing the values. That is one of the ways that moving to a more consistent design, but it is a little bit of an effort, and it needs to iterate. And a process like this is not just a one and done type of thing. It's important that once you implement it and something are consistent, that that's why in the design system side, people talk so much about ownership and the need for the developers to have ownership, the designers to have ownership, because everyone needs to be aware and they need to protect the design system and need to collaborate for the design system to be successful.
Okay, great. So we have another question here. I'd like to ask about the principles of design system construction and what will be considered a good enough design system.
So, a good enough design system. That's an interesting question. So, there was a survey done, and they're doing these yearly surveys now because design systems is becoming, I don't know, like almost like a something very unique. But they're doing these yearly surveys, and they said that most people, that most respondent, and I don't have the survey in front of me, so I could be misquoting by a little bit, but remember that most people surveyed by design systems said that their design system only had between 3 to 5 tokens. So if you think about it, that's a very small amount of values and style guides. Now, it could be because they take advantage of a lot of the defaults. The defaults are good enough, and now they're just going to change like some fonts and colors. That could be one thing. But from a developer perspective, I think it depends on the size of the product. It depends what the product calls for. I'll definitely start with something like material if I'm starting an app, and seeing where that app drives, or if there's opinions about designs or how people should be interacting that is very different, and be able to have the minimum foundation. So if you feel like you can easily change the design tokens, for example, and they'll be replicated throughout your application and all its widgets, I think you have, it doesn't matter if it's one token or 60, I think you have a solid design system.
Great, that's a good answer. There is another question. What are practices for making UI responsive adaptive to all screens? I believe this is one of the most common issues on Flutter right now with all the support that Flutter got.
Yeah. So this is, I guess I'll answer two ways. So Flutter, I mean, if you have time, I suggest just going through the Flutter docs and seeing like Flutter inside, for example, and going through how Flutter works. And the Flutter team does an amazing job with the documentation. The Flutter team also does an amazing job with telling people how to use widgets, and they have the decoding Flutter and showcases of the widgets itself and explaining so on. All those things are very good, because even it's common for me to find a particular widget, and because Flutter moves very fast. So, for example, I replaced a lot of code because that flexible action detector widget, and it's something that I wasn't aware. So we are depending maintaining this thing. So I suggest there's a lot of tools out there. Now you definitely want to use something like Layout Builder, and if you go to PubDev, and there's a talk also that I reference here on there on Flutter Forward, that they go through some at least one package called adapted scaffolding, for example, which allows to essentially is moving the navigation in the body according to the screen size. Now, I won't say that's half of the battle, but I think that's a big piece of the battle, is having the navigation display correctly on the different screen size, because that's where people are reaching to click. That's what they're expecting it to be. So if you open an Android app on a huge screen, it's just going to look weird. So having the adaptive scaffold does help. So I suggest taking a look at that. And there's a lot of packages that underuse the layout builder in order to use things like breaking points and grids and so on. I think, I don't know if that was the best answer for the question, but I think there's a lot of tools out there, and the communities continue to add to it.
Okay, we have no more questions, Leo. Thanks again for being here and sharing all your knowledge. I don't know if you want to add something else, contacts or something. Feel free.
No, just again, congratulations everyone for the events and people participating in the event. Thank you very much for allowing me to share something I'm so passionate about.